A foolish man does not lose his way through a single error, but through patterns he refuses to correct. His downfall forms quietly, through duties neglected, impulses indulged, and pride allowed to grow unchecked. In men, folly often takes on a familiar shape: recklessness mistaken for courage, ego mistaken for confidence, and avoidance mistaken for peace. These habits weaken judgment, scatter focus, and erode the discipline that should guide a man's life. Before these tendencies harden into character, they reveal themselves through clear and unmistakable signs. Signals that reason has been replaced by impulse, that virtue has been overshadowed by desire, and that the soul has drifted from its rightful strength. To recognize these traits is not to condemn, but to clarify. Only what is clearly seen can be corrected, and a man willing to confront his own faults gains the power to rise above them. These are 12 signs of an unwise man. Sign 1: confusing aggression with strength. A foolish man often treats aggression as the clearest sign of power. He raises his voice to force agreement, stiffens his posture to appear dominant, and uses anger as a tool to control the situation around him. In his mind, the louder he becomes, the stronger he appears. Yet this belief exposes the very weakness he attempts to hide. A man who is truly strong has no need to intimidate. He does not depend on fear, confrontation, or threats to establish his place. Aggression reveals that the inner life is ungoverned. Impulses erupt too easily, patience runs thin, and self-control disappears the moment frustration arises. Such a man misinterprets silence as victory, and others' discomfort as respect. But fear does not create loyalty. It creates distance. People may obey him for a moment, yet they never trust him. A man who seeks obedience instead of understanding builds relationships on fragile ground. The highest form of strength is mastery over one's own reactions, firmness without rage, confidence without arrogance, authority without cruelty. A man who cannot command himself cannot command anything else. Not his relationships, not his destiny, not his own peace. Aggression may look like power to the untrained eye, but it collapses the moment calm resistance appears. True strength stands steady without needing to roar. A foolish man shouts to prove control. A wise man remains composed because control is already his. Sign 2: running from responsibility. A foolish man treats responsibility as a weight meant for others to carry. Duties are postponed, obligations are ignored, and commitments are taken lightly unless they offer immediate reward. When mistakes occur, blame is scattered outward, toward circumstances, toward people, toward fate. Anywhere except the man who made the choice. He drifts through life, avoiding the very tasks that would strengthen him. Work becomes a burden to dodge, discipline becomes an enemy to resist, and structure becomes something he claims to be too restricted for. Yet a man who avoids responsibility also avoids growth, for nothing shapes character more than the willingness to carry one's own load. A person's worth is seen most clearly in how he fulfills the roles assigned by nature and circumstance. A man who refuses those roles becomes smaller than the challenges he fears. He repeats the same errors because he never stops to learn from them. He speaks of what he deserves, yet resists the effort required to earn it. In running from responsibility, he weakens every part of his life. His work lacks purpose, his relationships lack stability, and his ambitions lack foundation. He becomes restless, resentful, and easily discouraged, always waiting for life to improve, while making no effort to improve himself. A foolish man avoids responsibility because it demands discipline. A wise man embraces responsibility because it creates strength. Sign 3. Living for short-term pleasure. A foolish man allows desire to lead him more than discipline. Comfort becomes his highest aim, and pleasure becomes the ruler of his decisions. He chooses what feels good in the moment, rather than what strengthens him in the long run. Rest instead of effort, distraction instead of focus, indulgence instead of restraint. His days become shaped by impulses, entertainment over education, gratification over growth, excess over balance. He seeks escape from discomfort rather than mastery of it. And in doing so, he becomes a servant to appetite, never recognizing that the appetite grows stronger each time it is obeyed. Meditations warns of the danger in surrendering to pleasure, for it erodes the will and weakens the capacity for virtue. A man who cannot resist his desires is easily pulled from one distraction to the next, unable to commit deeply to any purpose. His goals remain dreams because pleasure steals the energy needed to pursue them. Short-term comfort often disguises long-term cost. He avoids the effort that would build a future he could respect, choosing instead the fleeting satisfaction of the present moment. What begins as harmless indulgence becomes a pattern that drains his potential. Pleasure is not the enemy, but dependence on pleasure is. A foolish man chases what feels good today. A wise man chooses what makes him stronger tomorrow. Sign 4. Speaking boldly while achieving little. A foolish man often surrounds himself with big words and small actions. He speaks confidently of his ambitions, his plans, and the greatness he intends to achieve. Yet the work behind those promises rarely appears. His tongue moves faster than his discipline, and his imagination outruns his effort. He criticizes easily, advising others on what they should do, while neglecting to apply the same standards to himself. His energy goes into debates, arguments, and declarations, activities that require no sacrifice, rather than into the quiet labor that builds a meaningful life. Man's character is measured by deeds, not speeches. Yet the unwise man believes the appearance of purpose is equal to purpose itself. He seeks admiration for plans he has not executed, and confidence for achievements he has not earned. This habit weakens him from within. The more he speaks without acting, the more he conditions himself to be satisfied with words alone. Dreams slowly turn into excuses. Excuses turn into grievances, and grievances turn into bitterness toward those who accomplish what he only talks about. A foolish man uses words to imitate progress. A wise man lets progress speak for him. Sign 5. Allowing ego to replace wisdom. A foolish man becomes trapped by his own ego. He rejects guidance, resists correction, and dismisses anyone who challenges his view of himself. Pride becomes a shield he hides behind, preventing him from confronting his weaknesses or learning from his failures. He treats disagreement as disrespect and honest feedback as an insult. Instead of examining whether he might be wrong, he clings tightly to the belief that he cannot be. The slightest criticism wounds him because his identity rests not on truth, but on the fragile need to appear superior. The greatest obstacle to growth is the belief that one has nothing left to learn. Yet the unwise man sees humility as a threat rather than a foundation. He chooses the comfort of arrogance over the discomfort that leads to improvement. This refusal to listen isolates him. He pushes away wisdom, frustrates those who care for him, and repeats the same mistakes because his pride refuses to let him acknowledge them. His ego grows larger as his character grows smaller. A foolish man protects his pride at the cost of his potential. A wise man sacrifices pride to gain understanding. Sign 6. Choosing chaos over order. A foolish man moves through life without structure. His days are scattered, his habits inconsistent, and his priorities constantly shifting. He wakes without intention, drifts without purpose, and reacts to circumstances instead of shaping them. Disorder in his surroundings reflects disorder in his mind. Tasks are started and abandoned, goals are set and forgotten, and responsibilities are handled only when pressure forces him to act. He calls this freedom, yet it is merely a lack of discipline, disguised as independence. Without order, he becomes a slave to impulse, doing whatever feels urgent, rather than what is truly important. The person's life is shaped by the consistency of his actions. But the unwise man resists routine, because routine demands maturity. Structure makes him uncomfortable, because structure exposes how often he falls short. This avoidance creates a restless spirit. His progress stalls, his relationships suffer, his ambitions remain unfulfilled. Instead of building a foundation, he stands on shifting ground, wondering why nothing in his life stays stable. A foolish man fears order, because order requires discipline. A wise man embraces order, because order creates strength. Sign 7. Mistaking stubbornness for principles. A foolish man clings to his opinions not because they are right, but because they are his. He refuses to consider new information, rejects alternative perspectives, and treats any change in viewpoint as a personal defeat. What he calls standing his ground is often just fear of being proven wrong. Stubbornness becomes a shield he hides behind. It allows him to avoid introspection, avoid growth, and avoid admitting that the beliefs he carries may be outdated or misguided. He confuses rigidity with conviction, unaware that true principles can withstand examination, while false ones crumble under the slightest scrutiny. A man's mind must remain flexible to truth, open to reason, and willing to adjust when wisdom demands it. But the unwise man treats flexibility as weakness and correction as humiliation. He plants his feet firmly, even when standing still harms him. This stubbornness breeds conflict. He becomes difficult to work with, hard to advise, and nearly impossible to reason with. Relationships strain under the weight of his immovability, and opportunities pass by because he refuses to adapt. A foolish man resists change because it challenges his pride. A wise man accepts change because it strengthens his character. Sign 8. Seeking validation through status and power. A foolish man measures his worth through achievements meant to impress others, rather than through the integrity of his character. Titles, wealth, attention, and influence become his benchmarks for success. He pursues status not to fulfill a purpose, but to fill an inner void he refuses to confront. He surrounds himself with symbols of importance, expensive possessions, loud declarations of success, exaggerated stories of his accomplishments. Yet beneath all of it lies insecurity. The desire to appear powerful reveals how fragile he feels within. Meditations teaches that true value comes from virtue, not from external rewards. But the unwise man becomes trapped in competition, constantly comparing himself to others. If someone has more, he feels diminished. If someone rises higher, he feels threatened. He cannot celebrate another's success because he sees it as an attack on his own identity. This obsession with status corrupts his relationships, He chooses companions based on how they elevate his image, not based on character. He seeks admiration over authenticity, dominance over cooperation. In chasing power, he forfeits peace. A foolish man builds his identity on things the world can take away. A wise man builds his identity on virtues no one can steal. Sign 9. Neglecting emotional discipline. A foolish man believes strength means feeling nothing. He suppresses his emotions instead of understanding them, hides discomfort behind humor or anger, and mocks vulnerability as if it were a weakness. Yet the emotions he refuses to face become the very forces that control him. Unacknowledged frustration turns into sudden rage. Unspoken fears turn into avoidance. Ignored sadness turns into apathy. His inner world becomes a storm he pretends does not exist, until the storm eventually breaks through in destructive ways. Meditations teaches mastery of the mind, not through denial, but through observation and restraint. The wise acknowledge their emotions calmly, allowing reason to guide their responses. But the unwise man fights against his own nature, believing his refusal to feel makes him strong. This inability to manage emotion damages his relationships. Loved ones walk on eggshells, unsure when the smallest pressure will cause him to snap. He isolates himself, believing nobody understands him, when in truth he has never allowed himself to be understood. A foolish man hides from his emotions. A wise man disciplines them. Sign 10. Turning relationships into battlegrounds. Oh. A foolish man treats the people in his life as opponents rather than allies. Pride pushes him to win every argument, assert dominance in every disagreement, and prove himself superior even in matters that require understanding rather than victory. He confuses control with leadership and believes love is maintained through authority rather than compassion. In his relationships, he competes more than he cooperates. He counts who gives more, who yields first, who apologizes last. Every conflict becomes a contest, every challenge a threat to his ego. Harmony with others is essential to a steady life. But the unwise man cannot find harmony because he sees vulnerability as defeat and compromise as surrender. He demands loyalty while offering little humility and expects devotion while showing minimal patience. His home becomes a battlefield of tension, silence, or constant friction. Instead of building trust, he builds resentment. Instead of nurturing connection, he nurtures conflict. A foolish man seeks victory over the people he loves. A wise man seeks peace with them. Sign 11. Chasing distractions to avoid facing himself. A foolish man fills his days with constant activity, not from purpose, but from fear of stillness. He surrounds himself with noise, entertainment, and endless tasks, so he never has to sit alone with his own thoughts. Silence feels dangerous to him, because silence reveals the truths he works hard to avoid. He convinces himself he is busy, yet accomplishes little. His mind hops from one distraction to another. Games, gossip, indulgence, entertainment, or meaningless tasks. Anything that prevents introspection becomes his refuge. He avoids examining his faults, avoids acknowledging his flaws, and avoids addressing the habits that limit his growth. Meditations teaches that the soul grows stronger when it confronts itself honestly. But the unwise man fears that confrontation. He chooses distraction over discipline, avoidance over accountability. His potential remains buried because he never pauses long enough to uncover it. This pattern weakens him in every aspect of life. His goals remain distant, his relationships remain shallow, and his character remains undeveloped. A man who cannot be alone with himself cannot hope to lead himself. A foolish man escapes into distraction. A wise man uses solitude to refine the soul. Sign 12. Fearing discipline. More than failure. A foolish man views discipline as a restriction rather than a path to strength. To him, routine feels oppressive, commitment feels heavy, and effort feels unnecessary unless pleasure accompanies it. He avoids the very practices that would build resilience: consistency, sacrifice, and self-control. Because discipline feels uncomfortable, he convinces himself it is optional. He chooses ease over effort, procrastination over progress, and comfort over challenge. Yet each avoided responsibility quietly shapes a future of regret. The man who refuses small daily hardships eventually faces larger ones, created by his own neglect. The disciplined mind becomes free, for it is no longer controlled by impulse or desire. But the unwise man fears this freedom because it demands structure. He prefers the temporary comfort of undisciplined living, unaware that he is building a life without foundation. Failure becomes familiar to him, not because he lacks ability, but because he lacks consistency. His dreams remain distant, his ambitions remain unfulfilled, and his potential remains unused, not from lack of talent, but from lack of discipline. A foolish man avoids discipline because it challenges him. A wise man embraces discipline because it transforms him. Foolishness in a man does not come from a single flaw, but from a pattern of choices. Choices that favor impulse over discipline, ego over humility, and comfort over growth. These 12 signs reveal the points where a man has drifted from wisdom: when aggression masks weakness, when responsibility is avoided, when pleasure becomes a ruler, and when pride silences truth. They expose how easily a man can be led by desire, distraction, and stubbornness instead of reason and virtue. Yet the purpose of naming these traits is not condemnation, but clarity. A man who can see his own shortcomings clearly gains the power to rise above them. What is recognized can be corrected. What is confronted can be changed. The soul shapes itself through its actions. Therefore, even a man steeped in folly can redirect his path through discipline, reflection, and steady effort. Wisdom is not found in perfection, but in the willingness to be honest with oneself. Every man carries within him the potential for strength, virtue, and clarity. The difference between the unwise and the wise is simple. One avoids the work of self-mastery, while the other embraces it. These signs serve as a mirror, showing exactly where character must be strengthened and where the mind must be steadied. And when a man chooses to govern himself, his impulses, his pride, his desires, he becomes unshakable, not through force or noise, but through the quiet, enduring power of inner discipline.